After last Sunday, the emotion of last Sunday, and for those of you who missed it, you missed an incredible day, incredible celebration of Mark Jackson's ministry. I'm proud to say that I organized it all and pulled it. But no, I had a great team of people that helped to do that, and just an incredible day. And if you didn't come because you were afraid you were going to cry, shame on you, you wimp, okay? I cried. It was just, I cried so much they almost had to carry me off the stage. And I'm not joking, okay? But at the end of that day, I was so tired. Okay, we had to own it, which is our confirmation class that afternoon, and Justin taught that class session, so I was grateful to have to do that. But such a tired day, emotional day. We sat down at 8:30 to watch TV, watch a short sitcom together before we go to bed, and I could tell she's hurting. I was like, oh my gosh. And so So she's like, it's hurting stronger. We're pregnant, okay, in case you don't know. The due date was the day before. The due date was the day before Mark Jackson Day. So the reason I was on video was because I wasn't sure I was going to be here. So people were like, you just did that because you were sure you were going to cry, weren't you? I was like, no, it's because I wasn't sure I wasn't going to be here. But so they were like 10 minutes apart. The contractions were, I was like, we're going. So not waiting for you this time to tell me when to go, because last time we barely made it in time to have the baby at the hospital. So we went, and she got the epidural about 2 a.m. The baby, Joseph Lawrence, was born, made his debut at 7:45 a.m. on Monday, April the 29th. And so we're on cloud nine. But I tell you, we're just interested to see how the other brothers have a son, 3, Matthew's 3, and James is 1. See how they would react to having a little brother. And Matthew, of course, he's kind of old enough to kind of know, anticipate. And we asked Matthew, what should we name the new baby? And his first choice was Baby Jesus. And so the second name was Joseph. So you can guess about what time of year this conversation was happening. But Joseph was actually one of the names I was thinking about too. But the one that we were really interested in was James. How is James going to respond to a little baby? James is only 17 months, and that he's been usurped. I mean, that's what James means, usurper, the name, as a derivation of Jacob. And now he's been no longer the baby, so how would he respond to this? And James had a priceless reaction when we brought Joseph home. First, he just stared for a long time at the baby for a couple minutes, and then pointed, and then he started doing this. This is like, what has happened? Literally, what happened? And James, that is exactly what we've been asking for the last 9 months. That is the same thing that we've been asking. What happened? How did this happen? But so we're the parents of 3 boys. And so lots of changes. Took some time off back in March. Took 3.5 weeks off vacation just because I knew we would not get any vacation the rest of the year, okay? Because Mark is retiring, and so preparing for life without Mark, and also, or at least not life, but, work without Mark. I mean, he's still alive. We talk about him like he's gone, like he's gone on to be with Jesus, but he's still here. He's alive. He's texting us this morning. But working without Mark, and serving in ministry without Mark, and also having a new baby, which literally happened 1 day apart. Literally, Mark retired the day after. His last day was the day after Joseph was born. And so I had to cram in those 3.5 weeks with the busiest vacation of my life, cram in everything of trying to get ready for a baby. Okay, we had a fence built in our yard, and we was having some kind of septic tank problem. That was real fun, and that was just a real joy. But one thing was that we had to get a new vehicle. Okay, Molly had a car we bought in 2015. It was kind of a crossover SUV, a great car. We loved it. It was paid off. Great, but the problem is you can't fit 3 car seats in that thing. It's not like when I was growing up, you can just throw them in the back of the truck, and just drive around. What happened to those days? What was wrong with that? We all lived, But we got to have 3 car seats, and so my sister has 3 babies. She had like her 3rd last year, and so she'd done all the research, and Molly did this research, and so we figured out exactly what we wanted, and so I decided, instead of like going to a dealer, that I was going to try to, and I had this vacation time, I was going to sell it on my own, sell her car, sell it online, and to see what we could get for it, because it's like private party value is better than trade-in. See if we might save a little bit of money there. And so I did. Cleaned it up. We put it online, and so got a bite on that and got a couple people interested. And so all that went down within about 2 days. There was some cars, even when you're looking, know exactly what you're looking for, okay, it can be stressful. We found exactly what we were looking for at some dealerships in Atlanta. We were going to go see Molly's family. They live just outside of Atlanta. And so got it all worked out. I sold our car. Didn't get exactly what I wanted for it. You know, it never kind of works that way. But I got a pretty good offer. I got a good deal. I was like, I'm taking it, okay, because we got to get rid of it. And so we went to Atlanta, on the other side of Atlanta, to get this van. And, you know, it's kind of like you never just dream of driving a minivan. You know, that's never like you imagine yourself, cruising with a minivan. Like, that is the cool life, you know, that I'm going to really have it made when I'm driving a minivan. You just don't imagine that. But we knew exactly what we wanted, and I did it over the phone. I called it, look, man, can you take this? I'm not going to drive all the way up there and haggle with you over a price, okay? You tell me. And so we worked it all out. And so I got there and just did a test drive, and I wasn't prepared. I was so excited. I was so excited to be in this mess. It's like I'd found it. I found what I wanted. And if that guy would have come back and wanted, we wanted $1,000 more, I probably would have, caved. But I don't know if I would have. But I was so excited. We got a great vehicle. I'm not debt-free anymore. You know, I was before that, but not debt-free anymore. We have now, which I would say, I always tell you, never borrow to buy a car, but we have. And but was so excited. I drove that thing home. Like, Molly was in my car, and so I got to drive the van all by myself, and it was like all the gadgets on there and everything. And it was just great. It's driving a new van. It's something new. And when we sold our car, the guy drove off with it. I mean, it wasn't new to us. And even the van was not new. It was actually used. We bought it. It was not a brand new vehicle. And the car we sold, it was 4 years old. We've been driving it for 4 years. It wasn't, I mean, we weren't excited to get in it and drive around. But that guy, he knew he got a good deal. He felt like he got a good deal. And he drove off. He was excited about his new car. And it just goes to show you. I mean, it wasn't new, but it was new to us. It was and if you ever got a new vehicle, or you moved into a new house, or you got a new piece of electronics, you got a new phone, hopefully that was new, you don't really want to get those, but getting new things is exciting to us. We get excited about new things. Even if it's not new to us, I mean, if it's not brand new, it's still new to us, and there's a sense of excitement. You feel alive, driving down with that new minivan. You just feel alive. It's something about having that new thing. It's exciting. And maybe part of that is because we get tired of old things. We get tired of that old car. I've been driving it for 10, 12 years, whatever, which is how long I've been driving my car, which is going to be longer before I can get a new one now, with all this. But so we get tired, we get bored with what's old. And then when we buy new things, we get something new. Well, it's not very long before what was new is old. Or it's not that it's old, it's just old to us. Or everything that's old to us, at some point, it was new. We love new things. And it's really not so much about what's new, it's just what's new to us. And sometimes we're just ready for a change. Well, the people of Israel were in that kind of a situation in their history. They were ready for something new. They were in a desperate place, really. They were in a very low place in their history. They had been carried into exile by the Babylonians. They had been conquered. Once a proud nation, Israel had been decimated. They had become two nations, Israel and Judah, and had been threatened by the Assyrians, who conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. And finally, the southern kingdom of Judah fell to the Babylonians. And not only did they come in there, but they came in and they wiped out the holy city of Jerusalem. I mean, this is the holy city, the city of God, David's city. Not only did they wipe out Jerusalem, but they destroyed the temple. The glorious temple of Solomon that had already been plundered with all of its gold, all inlaid with gold, and even the furnishings like the Ark of the Covenant, disappeared. Devastation for the nation of Israel. And so they were carried into exile. The kings and all of the noble people of the people of Judah, they were all carried into exile. And this was done by empires and nations that conquered other nations in those days. They would carry the people out from their land just to further subdue them. So that not only have you been conquered, but there's really no hope of you coming back. Because people just don't come back from exile. When you're carried away to go live in the home country, within a generation or two, you've assimilated with them, and the culture is lost, and people will just forget. And that's what it seemed would have happened with the people of Israel. I mean, this was 70 years that they're in Babylon. I mean, that's 2 or 3 generations will have come and gone. Those who had left Judah and Israel, they would not, most of those, almost all of them, lifespan was not very long in those days, they would be dead. But in the midst of this, in this moment of despair, in this low point, God speaks. And God speaks with the prophet Isaiah. And if you read through Isaiah, the first 39 chapters of Isaiah seem to kind of be before the Babylonian captivity or whatever, when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. But in chapter 40, things change. And the word is specifically to the people, and it applies. In fact, earlier in chapter 43, God says something incredible. He says, I'm going to bring you back. He says in verse 14, for your sake, I will send to Babylon and bring down as fugitives all the Babylonians. I'm going to make the Babylonians fugitives. He says this, in verse 16, this is what the Lord says. And he just introduces himself. I'm the Lord. The covenant name there is Yahweh. We translate it sometimes from Greek into English as Jehovah. The Lord, just remember me, the Lord, your God, okay? You might think that, God's forsaken you, forgotten you, but He's got something to say to you, and this is what He says. He says, remember me, I'm the one who made a path through the sea, a path through the mighty waters. Verse 17, He said, I'm the one that drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. Do you remember me? What is He talking about there? Making a way through the waters, a way through the sea, chariots and horses, being drowned, or basically laying there, never to rise again, being destroyed. Do you remember that? Do you remember that story? What is He talking about? I mean, this is hundreds of years later, maybe even almost 1,000 years later. He's referring to the Exodus. You remember that way back when your ancestors, you remember those stories of old, you heard about it, all that happened in those glory days about how I made a way through the sea and you passed through and Pharaoh and the armies were drowned in the sea and I saved you in that dramatic moment. Do you remember that, Israel? You think about that's the story we grew up with. That's what we heard long ago. We heard about those glory days. But listen to this. I mean, those glory days seem to be a long time ago. Now we're experiencing another kind of exile, another kind of slavery. We're in Babylon, okay? You remember that, God says? Well, listen. Verse 18. Forget those former things. Don't dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Now, you remember what happened after they crossed the Red Sea? They wandered in the wilderness or in the desert for 40 years on their way to the Promised Land. And now they're far removed from that Promised Land. But here's God saying, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. That's what happened on the way. There was places, there was like water that miraculously was provided in a rock and all of these things that God provided for them. He says, I'm going to do it again. In fact, God goes specifically through Isaiah, and He even names who's going to be the instrument by which this is accomplished. I mean, this is pretty unprecedented in the biblical prophetic writings. In chapter 44, the next chapter, verse 28, he says Cyrus. Now, if you know anything about your history of these empires, Cyrus is the king of Persia. And the Persians are going to displace and defeat the Babylonians. And Cyrus, who is definitely not exactly, would say, a moral person. I mean, he's probably a tyrant. But God says about him, He's my shepherd and He will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid. And so through the prophet Isaiah, God says Cyrus is going to be the means by which Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and the temple, the foundations to be laid, which the temple will be rebuilt. And it's believed that King Cyrus actually knew about this writing from Isaiah, and maybe one of the reasons why he let the people go back. And that became one of his priorities, you know. He took that on. He issued a decree. And so 70 years later, after 70 years, the unbelievable happened. The people went back. They went back. They returned. That doesn't happen. They went back. Nehemiah went back to rebuild the wall. There was Ezra the scribe who came back. Zerubbabel was one of the leaders, the governor who helped to rebuild the temple and to restore Jerusalem. The people went back, and of course, you know, they went back and they stayed there. They stayed there. That's why when 400 years later, when Jesus comes along, the Jews are back in Judea and the temple is built and there's sacrifices, only for it to happen all over again in 70 AD. And now again, there's a nation there called Israel in 1948, which is another incredible story. God says, I'm doing a new thing, and I'm going to send the people back. Well, I think part of our fascination with what's new, whether it's a new car, whether it's a new house, a new electronic gadget device, whether it's a new baby even, is that there's something about new things that just make us feel alive, you know? Kind of like what I was feeling driving that minivan, you know? I feel alive. Like, look at me, you know, driving in the minivan. It's really very large. I don't even know if it classifies as a minivan, but the van, just say it like that. New things. They remind us we're alive because living things are always changing. And one thing about God's people, the church, is that we are less like an organization and more like an organism. We are a living thing, okay? We're described as the body of Christ. And we belong to a living God. And a living God is always up to something new. A living God is always doing something new. And that's why if you read in other places in Isaiah, if you read around chapter 41, 42, I'm going to preach on some of these chapters in later weeks of this series, is that God compares himself to the stone idols and statues and memorials that the people make, that he says, I'm not like them. I'm not like those mute gods made of wood and stone, those that can. I am the living God. I made the heavens and earth, and I did it before. I can do it again. And the fact that the temple's been destroyed, the Ark of the Covenant has been lost wherever it is until Indiana Jones is going to find it, you know, all this is lost. But that doesn't mean that I'm dead. I am very much alive, and I am doing a new thing. So don't dwell on the past. Now I think that when God says this in verses 18 and 19 of chapter 43, when he says, forget the former things, I think that's a little bit of hyperbole, you know. We see that in the Bible. Jesus says one place, if you don't hate your father and mother, you can't be my disciple. And it's like people are like, what? Yeah, I think he's using hyperbole there. He's not saying you should hate your parents, you know. You don't believe that. You don't believe Jesus says. So I don't think he's saying literally don't forget them. I mean, they're not going to abandon the Passover celebration. They're going to continue to remember the Exodus. But that's not where you live. You remember the past as it helps you to live in the present. I mean, there's different ways that we can approach the past. For some people, it's nostalgia. I mean, they want to live in the past. Not only do they think about the past, but they want to be there. They want to be in this nostalgia in the former things. We preferred the former things to the present things, and I can understand that. And then for others, there's trauma in the past. There's things that happened in the past that will always control me, that I can't get over, that I can't move beyond, that I can't move past. In both of those senses, that's an improper approach to the past, at least from what God is saying. The past is good. The past is important. It's just important to remember what God has done, to remember those people in the past, to remember what they did, who they, but only as it helps us to live in the present and to be aware of what God is doing now, to be attentive of the new thing that God is doing, because the present is all that we've got. It's all that's given to us. So that's why they call it the present, right? You ever heard that before? I made that up. I did not make that up. That's come up. That's every graduation speech you've ever heard. Somehow or another that comes up in there. So today, or let me say this about God's activity, okay? What God's doing. God's new activity. God's new activity. This is what I think is saying in Isaiah 43 and what he's saying still today. That God's new activity will be consistent with, yet different from, what God has done in the past. It will be consistent but different. Consistent but different. God is specifically referencing the Old Testament story of the Exodus, the great salvation story, the great freedom story. Just finished preaching a series on it just this past month in April. Okay? God's saying, I'm making streams in the desert. I'm making a way in the wilderness. You remember all of those things. That's what I've done. God's going to be doing something similar. He's going to be making a way for His people where it seems like there's no way. But there's also going to be different. It's not going to be exactly like the way it was before. I mean, before there were plagues and there was this dramatic exit and the parting of the sea. Well, this time it's going to be through a decree by a king named Cyrus. Okay, what God is doing in the present has been consistent with what He's done in the past. It's not going to be inconsistent with that, but it's going to be different. God spoke to Moses through a burning bush. Did He speak to anybody else that way? No, He didn't. I mean, God used Samson to destroy. We'll preach on Samson this summer. God used Samson, incredible story of Samson, but there's no other story like it in the Old Testament. In all the Bible, this guy, the way God uses him to bring victory for His people. In the same way in your life, sometimes we expect God to lead us or guide us the exact same way He did before. That's not always going to happen. Sometimes it's going to be in your Bible. God's going to speak to you through the reading of the Word. Sometimes maybe it's going to be just through an impression in your spirit. Sometimes it's going to be through a friend. Sometimes it's going to be through circumstances where God is saying, you are going to do this whether you like it or not. You know, I mean, I don't know if you ever had situations like that. God speaks to us in different ways. There's the new thing that God does. It's going to be consistent with but different from what God has done in the past. And today, we're launching the ReNew series, which will last through the first Sunday of June, a 5-week series. But it's more than just a 1-month sermon series. This is going to be an initiative for our church for the rest of this year. You're going to hear about it this month, but you're going to hear about it for several months. Because we're going to be anticipating what new thing God is doing. It's a season of change for our church. And what God is going to be doing will be consistent with what God's done in the past. What we expect God to be doing here. Mulder Church is a living thing. We are made up of living people. We have the Holy Spirit living inside of us, among us, in us. Okay? And so God's going to be a new thing. It's going to be consistent with what God's done in the past. People coming to know Jesus Christ. People growing in that relationship, growing in God's Word, growing in prayer, sharing life together in groups, connecting, growing, serving, reaching out to the poor, the lost, all of these people, helping people who are in need, all of these things, all the things that have made Mulder Church great, a caring, loving family, all of these things are going to be part of it, consistent with what God's done in the past. But it's going to be different. It's going to be different. I mean, our church is different now. Mark Jackson is no longer on staff. I mean, I'm still adjusting to that myself. Barbara Brown is about to retire, coming up our executive assistant. We're having some other staff changes. Our piano, at the early service, Carol Ratton, who's been playing the piano here for many years, will be retiring at the end of this month. And I'm hoping that's it, you know. So we're having lots of change. But our community is changing. I mean, there's rumors floating around there that it seems like maybe a new school is about to be built in our community. And that's going to drastically change our community. Redland is changing. Our world is changing. Our culture is changing. Our country is changing. People know less about the Bible. People know less about Christian values. You can't assume that anymore. The church things are going to change. How is it going to look? I don't know. But I do believe this. I believe God's doing a new thing, and I believe He will lead us just as He's always led us in the past. About 7 years ago, we had an initiative like this, a visioning season, and we had some new things that came out of it. We had the Village Church at Autumnwood came out of that. We had a new service that was birthed out of that. We had a social media, so a larger web presence that was birthed out of that. There's some other things that were in that visioning that may be about to be birthed, like there's some other things that still haven't been done that may be close to being birthed here. So this is a season for that kind of seeking God's will for our future. And it begins with what God is doing. It begins with prayer. And so we're going to have a 40-day season of prayer starting July 21st. That's why I said this is later in the year, because we're just about to get into summer here. 40 days of prayer. And by this time in July, I believe our new associate pastor will be here. That time, I'm hoping that within the next month, maybe they'll be able to make an announcement on that. We cannot, at this point, still working on that. They're still in committee, still working on that. But this will be 40 days of prayer toward the end of July, and I believe at that time, we're looking at having focus groups, where ReNew groups, focus groups, where you'll have an opportunity to get to know your new associate pastor, as well as seeking God's will. We'll be praying and asking questions about, where do you see Mulder Church? How do you believe God is leading Mulder Church for the years, for the season ahead? What new thing is God doing? What new opportunities are there? Because whatever that is, whatever it is for our church, and I am so excited about the future of our church. I mean, I'm so sad. You saw how sad I was last week. But I miss Mark Jackson, but I am so excited about the future of Mulder Church. I am very excited. I'm excited as I've ever been. There's great opportunities. God is doing something new. And let me tell you, whatever new thing that God is doing, it's going to involve making people new. That's what it's going to involve, making people new. Because we're going to talk more about next week. This is God's great project. God is making all things new. But it starts with me and you. So isn't that good news? Isn't that good news that God is doing something new? That you don't have to be controlled by nostalgia in the past, or better yet, trauma in the past. And better than some shiny new, whatever it is, new shiny you just bought that's going to be old in 6 months, is to get involved in a mission that's about making all things new. That never gets old. And if it gets old, it's because there's something in us that's lost the passion for the mission, not because the mission itself isn't new. God is doing something new. And it starts with what He's doing in me and you. And really, it starts in what He's already done for us.